The next section we want to talk about is on page 16. And there's two sections here we'll talk about. One is new this year. And new this year is going to be super important if you've been with us before, if you've participated in First Lego League Challenge before the Masterpiece season. This is just a brief highlight as to what is new this year and has changed from last year. We'll address these when we get to them in their rules section, but this is kind of where they're all aggregated together. More importantly, right here, I think, is the glossary section. And we're going to take a brief look here. We're actually at the top of the rules section. This is probably the most important thing you'll read about any rule, and that's that the wording means exactly what it says, and it means only what it says, which means when you're reading through the rules, pay as much attention to what the rule says as to what the rule does not say. So when you're interpreting rules, it's only what it says that matters. Now, if rules need to be updated, there will be a challenge update released. So between the two sources is the Robot Game Rulebook and then the challenge updates. The challenge updates supersede the rules when there are challenge updates that affect them, and then you fall back to the rulebook. So if it's not in one of those two documents, those are the two kind of golden sources of truth. And another note here is that text always has authority over pictures. So when we talk about the glossary, these are some very key definitions. You'll see words like equipment, field, interruption, launch, match, mission, precision tokens, robot, and technicians. You can read through these. Most of it is pretty straightforward. There are three I do want to call out special attention to. The first is equipment, which is right up here. And related to equipment is robot. So equipment is everything that the team brings to the match. So you bring your robot, you bring extra Legos, you bring this, that. All the stuff that your team brings to the table is equipment. If it's already at the table when you get there, it's not equipment. Equipment is what you bring. Related to that is the robot. And the robot is part of your equipment. So you have the big idea, the big equipment, and then part of your equipment is the robot. There is equipment that is not the robot, but all of the robot is equipment. The robot specifically is consisting of, the controller and any extra equipment that is combined with it. An interruption, that's the second one I want to talk about. And that is when the technicians interact with the robot or anything touching it after launch. So you can touch equipment that is not part of the robot, as long as the robot is not touching it. So if the technicians, which are your team members, interact with the robot or anything touching it. So that could be a piece of equipment that is touching the robot. It could be a mission model that is touching the robot. It could be primarily those two things, but like we said, anything the robot is touching counts as an interruption here. So if you're not supposed to touch, so that is your interaction with the robot. And that doesn't mean, when the robot's just out in the middle of the field. Technically, an interruption can happen when the robot's off the field, but that doesn't necessarily count as a bad interruption. So don't think of an interruption as a bad thing. An interruption just means the technician is interacting with the robot or things touching the robot after you launch it. Sometimes interruptions are fine, sometimes they're not fine. Don't think interruptions are necessarily bad. And then finally, the last key word we want to talk about is launch. And launch is when the technicians activate the robot from completely within a launch area to cause it to move autonomously. So these big quarter circles on either end of the field are the launch areas, and we'll talk about those in a moment. If the robot is not completely in the launch area, you can't launch it. So the referees will stop you from launching, so make sure you're completely within those areas. Read through the glossary closely. Make sure you understand what all these words are and how they're used in the context of the playing field. But equipment, interruption, and launch are probably the three you'll want to be most familiar with because there are the most rules associated with those three.